All right. Thank you for being here. Rhys Shaw, writer, actor, filmmaker. What is your first memories of writing?
Uh, Stories as a child for school. I remember I wrote a really silly story around Halloween about these three pumpkins sitting on a fence, and their names all rhymed.
Okay, I like that. What were their names? Now I have to know.
I think it was like Mumpkin, and Blumpkin or something. It was
Okay.
ridiculous. I have
Okay.
it somewhere. My mom saved everything, so I do have it somewhere, and it's on that. Remember the really big lined paper that you would write your stories on
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
pencil? Yeah, I should look it up now that you've reminded me of it.
Yeah, well done. My wife I have some of her stuff from when like kindergarten or maybe shortly after. And she has one about a dragon that lives in the woods by our house and it doesn't like anyone but her. I was like, oh, that's nice. And she's an only child. That makes sense.
The good defender.
Yeah. So writing. Then did you, with the filmmaking and acting, did that come after writing the first book or was it before?
It came before.
Before.
I,
Okay.
I just wrote for myself for years. I wrote short stories. I wrote poems. I wrote novellas. I wrote all kinds of things just for me. I never published. I never did anything with them. And I acted and I made films. So my husband and I have a production company and we worked for everybody else. We would do what other people wanted us to film. And then one day he said, you know what? There's this competition in England. We should write a short for it. We should enter it. And we just each sat with our notepads and wrote characters. And then from the characters, we had to write a film that would fit around those characters. And there were rules based on the competition. Twist was the rule. And so we called ours the Warp Institute of Shock Therapy, Twist. And we still have that sign on our front door, and people ring our doorbell sometimes asking if we do shock therapy, which is terrifying. And from there, we started being a little bit more creative with our filmmaking, and we moved into a lot more music videos because they're just so much fun. And then we could write the stories for those. And then a documentary on home death care.
Okay. And then you got into writing the books after you'd done all that stuff, or was that while it was
Yeah.
going on?
No, I had one morning, you a lot of things come to you in your sleep, and I keep a notepad by the bed. And I woke up one morning and I wrote down this just couple paragraphs of this story. And that was in 2013. And I remember because I've gone back and thought about it. And also I have it on my computer when I transferred it. Right. And I kept writing on that over the years while I was acting, while I was filmmaking, while I was doing all that. I'd just come back to this story, sometimes every year, sometimes every few months, sometimes 2-3 years would go by. And then 2020, when the world shut down, I thought, I'm just going to write this as a book for me, just for me. And I'm a great believer in things appear when you open yourselves up to them. And suddenly things were coming up online. It was like, what about this special day to listen to this writer? Or what about this? And I started just doing all this stuff. And next thing I know, I've gone and finished my book and planned on that being it. And it is a standalone. The first book in the series came out in 2022. But then the others just were like, wait a minute, you have more to tell on this. So then I just carried on. And the final book of that series just came out a couple months ago. So there's 4.
Plans for more, or?
Yes, I'm writing one now. I'm about 40,000 words into another book, very different. I love history. So the first book series is set in the 14th century in a European land. And this one is set in 2 timelines in 1727, very specific, I know, and 1978, because the last woman tried, actually, she really wasn't tried, she was just burned as a witch in Edinburgh in Scotland was 1727. So there's a graveyard involved. There's a bit of soul jumping into people in 1978, and there's some true incidents that happened with the women that were accused of witchcraft, but also, like, I'm a big fan of the Clash. There was a Clash concert in Edinburgh in 1978, so I picked that time to set it around. Yeah.
When you do historical fiction, do you try to weave it in to the point where people read it and go, wait a minute, did this really happen? Or are you using more like the touchstones of that time to write your story around?
So the new book or series, because I don't know yet, I'm doing the first thing you said, trying to weave it in. People go, did this really happen? The last series, I just focused on getting it as accurate as possible for the 14th century. I made up all the people, I made up the countries, I made up everything. So there's an argument of whether it's historical fiction, depending upon who you ask. Some people say it's historical fantasy fiction, although there's no magic. So, that kind of comes with fantasy quite often. But it's
Oh,
everything that happens in my story could have happened, often did happen in the 14th century. And I was real fastidious with the language. I mean, I was constantly looking up the etymology of words, not in my narrator's perspective, but in the dialogue. I never wanted to use a word that wasn't being used. I never wanted to eat a food that hadn't been introduced yet. I really went back through that history a lot.
yeah. I like that about the research part of writing too, because you learn those things that you never, they didn't teach you in school, but that might have captured your attention a little more. And most of that I learned through putting together timelines, like just writing out whatever the time your story is, and then putting big events in history, and then going over that with something else, going over that with something else. Is that a way that you do it, or how do you keep the timeline straight?
Lots of notes, lots of notes. I write a timeline of my characters. I write what's happening to who. And I do, when ideas come to you when you're not at the computer, you just jot down things in a book, and then I'll have to make them fit the timeline. The current book I'm writing, I'm being a little bit more specific on the timeline. I've actually put a timeline out already, which has the different characters, because I'm time hopping, and so I want to keep it straight with ages and with the actual people that I'm bringing in. For instance, I'm bringing in the last woman who was accused of witchcraft and died, but I'm not bringing her into the same place where it happened. But I'm bringing in similarities of her daughter as well into the story. And then at the end, I'll put something about this is based on this person because, gosh, it was a tragedy what happened to her.
Yeah.
So when you do your writing with timelines, I'm just curious how that works for you.
Normally, the big historical fiction I've been working on for some time, and I haven't gotten good enough at writing to get to the point where I'm happy with the product. But I would say it's probably 75% done. But it goes from 1775 to 1815, and it follows a guy sold into slavery from the Guinea area of Africa into South America, and then South America, Central America to North America, and then back into wherever the story takes them. And I have that timeline going on top of a modern day timeline. And I didn't realize this when I was first writing it, but it kind of feels like when I look at it and step back, I go, oh, this is kind of like the Princess Bride, not
Mm.
like the Princess Bride time or anything like that, but where you have Columbo reading to Fred Savage in like a present time, and then you go to this other time. So it goes back and forth like that. And I was trying to do it to where my idea was I would put both of them together so they're woven together. In the beginning of the book, you could read through and you're getting modern day back in time, modern day back in time, modern day back in time. And then also including a section that's just the modern day story, and then a section that's the back in time story. It's not any different, it's just separated. So
Yeah.
you could read it whichever way you want it. If you were like, I'm tired of all the back and forth, I just want to have this story set apart, I do it like that. But to keep track of the timeline, I took that and I wrote out all you draw the picture of the line with the years, and then I put in the wars going on in that time.
Mm.
And then the people in countries of interest that were in charge of that. So the presidents or the heads of the countries. And then you start to go, oh, okay, I didn't realize that was happening at the same time as this. And then other stories from that time, you could, a lot of things you could look online and say what was popular, or the most popular song in this time, like 1820, what were the most popular songs or most popular music, and then you could put that in there and you start getting a feel for it. I don't think you ever get exactly what it was like to be back then, because you're looking at it through the eyes of somebody that's living in a modern time. But it's interesting when you find out things like they didn't really use forks a whole lot. They use flat knives that were dull because they didn't want to put forks that were sharp and pointy near their face. And you go, wow, we put forks near our face all the time. And then when they slept, they it was mostly sitting up or propped up. You rarely laid down flat and slept if you were in polite society, because they thought it would cause more problems with breathing. And then you look at the different diseases that were going on then. So it's just, you paint that picture, and I don't know, accurate or not, you just try to get it as straight as you can in your mind and then make the story around it. But the language was a difficult part for me. So what I just did, I just decided at the front of the book, I'll put translated to modern English, and then I'll just let them talk normal.
I have read some historical fiction series like that, and they say that I use
Okay.
contractions, I use this, I use that. I'm just writing it modern, and as long as you put that up front, it's fine. I think it's how you write. I'm curious. Did you write, or are you writing each timeline separately? Because like the way I'm doing mine is I'm bouncing back and forth. I'll write something in 1727, and then I'll write something in 1978, and then I'll carry on, and then the next day I'll carry on. So then sometimes I separate them like you just said, and I'll copy and paste and put them all together so I can do like a read through to see, are they flowing, and then where I want to break them. Or do you write them broken or all in one?
The same way you do,
Okay.
where
Yeah.
sometimes it's back and forth because you're getting that flow of the story, but then you go, wow, am I going to lose this thread? Am I going to lose someone else? And usually it's each little section goes back and forth. And I was toying with the idea of either using a different font for whichever time you were in, or a different color, or a different page color. And I'm not sure how that can be done normal printing on Amazon
Get
KDP
quite
for,
pricey.
yeah. So, and then I thought, well, I'll have where they're mixed together, it'll be one way. And then you flip the book over backwards and then read the other way, and you can have the two separate stories. And I was like, that might be too gimmicky. I don't know. I'm still thinking about that, but I'm also thinking about the story, because I think there's a message in it that I haven't gotten to yet. Like
Yeah.
the creative force has not said, this is the whole point of this. Like it's happened along the way, and I can still read parts of it, and you have that emotion of it, and you're like, oh yeah, this is good, but it's not as good as it should be yet. And I've written other things that I feel like you get to the point where you've read it so many times that you're like, all right, now I'm done. I'm done writing this, and I'm going to set it aside and read it later, or this is just it. I know I'm done. It ends satisfactorily.
Yeah.
So
At
then,
some point you have to stop.
yeah, you're just going to say the same thing in different ways.
Yeah, or it's just it could become a procrastination technique for perfection.
Mm-hmm.
You have to let it go, or get a beta reader and then carry on. And yeah. Yeah, I was thinking when you were saying no forks, I was like, well, they didn't really drink as much water. Maybe it's because they were drinking more alcohol. They were worried about the forks.
Excellent. I didn't think about that. Yeah, they're all drunk.
Yeah. But history, I used to, so I'm in California. The gold rush was a big deal out here. And I used to give tours dressed as a character from 1865, and she was based on a real person. Her and her husband came out here to California, and we Sacramento is an area where the city was raised, so there's still an underground that exists, much like Seattle. Um,
Mhm.
Ours isn't open to the public, the underground, because it's not been done up. Like, you can go to Seattle, you can go down to the shops below, but we would give tours and take people down there anyway. And so one of my favorite things to do for history was try, and as an actor, I tried to help some of the other, not because I was a busybody, but because my boss actually asked me to help some of the other portrayers who necessarily weren't actors. I would say, write your simple story, just a page of this fire, this great fire that happened. Write it from you saw it. You were looking out your window. There it was. Now write it from a person who was down the street but heard about it. Now write it from a person who was in the middle of the fire, and just all the different ways. And if you can do that and then pull from it to give it to the people that are coming on your tours, it's going to come alive for them. And it was great because I would have people say, my son hates history. He's in high school, but he loved the tour. And I'm like, yay, I did something right. And I think you can do that with historical fiction also, I mean, I don't know about you, but reading it's so many things. It's a way to learn, but it's also a way to, just escape. And it's a
Mhm.
way to overcome. For me, as a writer, I've written things into my books things that still happen today, things that have happened, things that some of them personally to me, some of them to other people. It's very cathartic. You get rid of a lot of stuff. And I'm not going to go out and kill anybody, but I can kill them in my books.
Mm. I mean, you could kill them in real life. You just got to be careful.
I'd probably be really good at it because of all the training I do.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah. You got to use your power for good, though. Use your power for good. There's a song. Yeah. The band name it's an unfortunate band name. I think it was by the Butthole Surfers, but I'm not sure. But
heard of
maybe
them.
it wasn't. And it talks about don't put don't put breaking up, don't put off breaking up with someone when you know you really want to. And I've kind of changed that in my head to don't put off killing someone when you know they really should be. Now that sounds really bad and it could be used against me in court, but it's just in writing, especially since you can't do it so easily in real life, you can have that sense of justice in writing or that sense of injustice just as easily by not
Yes.
getting rid of someone that needs to be gotten rid of. So
Yeah.
that
I
is
mean,
the
we love
interesting
that
thing.
though. We love that, right? We watch things on television. We watch on the baddies, and you're just like, get him. And then when they finally do get their comeuppance, if they do, it feels so good. But we love to hate them.
Yeah.
Villains are good. They're good to have in your story. I mean, you can't have light without dark, right? So you have to have both.
Where do you think the creative, or how do you think about the creative force? Do you think that creativity is something that we manifest from our own experiences just in ourselves, or that resides somewhere else or any place else that you kind of tap into and you become an antenna for it or a conduit for it? Or is it a mix of both?
I think it's a mix of both. And I say that because for instance, I do a silent writing time with other writers on my computer at a certain time every day. And how can I be creative if, I just sit down and I start writing at that time every single day. And I write for an hour solid without a break. Um, but then you'll wake up, like I said, you'll wake up from a dream, or you'll be driving your car, or you'll be doing something. And that's when the notepads come in handy and you can quickly write down something that came from somewhere, whether it was your own experience, or whether it was a thought that popped into your mind, or whether it was someone you saw and you thought, what if, da 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 da. But I really think our subconscious holds a lot of that. And I believe in otherness. I believe in a spiritual world. I believe that if we can tap into that, like a muse sort of thing. It doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily all of our own experience. Some of it is, but some of it is just, I mean, where do people ideas come from? Art. I'm going to do a painting. Where does that idea come from? It's both. It has to be both, I think. What about you? What do you think?
I think it's both because I can feel when I'm pushing it, when it's mainly just me, the here person. And then I can tell when I think most people would say when it's writing itself is that's when you're like, oh, that's the times you're like, let me get into this zone so this can happen. And I think that showing up, you hear a lot of writers talk about where you just have to have that time and show up, and then it'll show up too. And I probably felt differently about it before I started doing poetry more, but poetry to me is a different thing than writing stories. I don't think it's completely different. I think it's just in the world of muses, I think it comes from a different place. So I visualize it differently for writing books versus writing poetry. And I worried after the first poetry book, my plan was I'll just do this poetry book and then I'll be done with poetry. I can go back to science fiction. And after I finished it, I had shown up so much, so often with the idea of I need to write some poems. So I would give myself the goal of 10 poems a month for a year. And then I'd look at those and say, is there enough here for a book? And I'd try to do 100 poems in a book. And you end up mainly with more poems than you're going to use. So you do more than 10 a month. And it's not just sitting down at the table and saying, okay, I'm going to write a poem about this. It's making sure you're available to take those notes at 2 a.m. when the idea comes to you, or to type it in the shower, because iPhones are now waterproof enough that you can take that note down there, or stop doing what you're doing whenever you're doing it to write this note down, whether it's a line in a story, a line in a poem, if you want to say it like that, or just some other idea that you know is important for some reason because you've had enough of them that you didn't write down and you regretted it. So you're like, well, I'm a writer, so I'm going to have to write. Number one, I have to write. So you write it down and you come back later to it. And I think that's how you connect with whatever creative force that you're specializing in, or that you're becoming the conduit for, painting, writing, whatever, that you show up enough that that force recognizes you as a way that it can have an outlet. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's another part of our being that's connected to us that we can't see right now because we're too busy experiencing this life, this reality, this program, this simulation, whatever you want to call it. And if we knew all that, it would ruin this. For whatever reason we're here. I think we're here for perspective and experience, but I would hear arguments for other reasons. But I think that's maybe you're not supposed to know all that other stuff because you would ruin it. So you get that little bit of creativity that just bleeds through. Like if you're watching somebody playing a sport or doing something that takes a skill that they developed, and you see them doing it and you want to help, that maybe that's whatever other forces there are in the universe are like, they want to help, but they know they're not supposed to. You can't go out and play the soccer game for your kid. You have to let them play it. Yeah. So
well, if we knew all of that, it would be overwhelming, whether it's within us already or not. But if our conscious mind knew all of it, it'd be overwhelming. And why we're here, you said for perspective and what else?
Experience.
Yeah, but what if we've been here before? So it's a re-experience, or it's an experience to get it done better this time. I mean, sure, I write my books for enjoyment, but I like to think that someone reading them might get something that helps them in some way, because I have written very strong women into my books, and they manage, even when they're in horrible situations, they always are hopeful. They're always hopeful, even when it seems dire. And they will bring in either other women or men to help them, but they at the end of the day, they are on their own. And so I think one of the reasons we're here is also to become better people, grow as a human, and that's part of the experience, I think, but also to maybe help someone else. And sometimes we don't even know, it could be a stranger that we just did a little tiny thing to, who was having a really crappy day. And we did one kind thing and it made a big difference in their life. So I'd like to think we're here to help as well.
Yeah, I've been developing this idea and I don't think it's really original. It's just thinking about it and kind of connecting the dots of stuff that other people have already said. But the idea that we're all one makes sense to me. And it explains that idea of do unto others as you'd have them do to you, and love your neighbor as yourself, and all that, because that is you. That outside of whatever we're in right now, simulation, reality, pick a word to describe this, that we're all the same thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if we're all the same being, like we're just fragmented sections of one big being, or if it's something different than that. And I'm not worried if it's one or the other. I just think it helps give the perspective of here when you think, why does all this pain exist? Why all these bad things happen? Why does all these good stuff exist? Why does all that happen? That maybe if you were an all-powerful being, that you wouldn't know the kind of fear you know as a human. You wouldn't know mortality, or the fear of getting stung by a bee or shot or anything. You wouldn't know that. So you have to break yourself apart into these small little pieces to get that perspective and that experience, so you can understand it as in a one being can understand it. And you don't want to treat the other people bad, because that's you. Yeah. Now, you're going to meet people you don't like, because there's certainly parts of you that you don't like, but sure. It goes against maybe the religious upbringing I had, but it also puts it into focus, because if you were to say we lived in a simulation, that means it was designed by someone or something. So, I mean, you could call that God. I don't know. Or maybe this is all just an illusion and a trap, because we're in some sort of galactic war and we're prisoners somewhere, and this is how they're trying to break us down and figure out what we know. I don't know.
I've always been fascinated with parallel universes and parallel lives. And sometimes I wake up and I'll go, did I dream that? Or is that my other life happening to me right now somewhere else? But you're a science fiction writer. And when you were saying all of that, I could just picture this being, and I'm going to give him human form just because that's easy. And one of them is the skin cells, and one of them is the toenails, and one of them is the eyeballs, and one of them, and they're all doing, like you said, they're all doing their thing. And we don't like all of them, because maybe we don't like the bottom that's, pooping for us, or maybe we don't like this, but we like the heart, or we like, that'd be really cool. That's a really cool concept. I like that. But I think what it goes back to is connectedness. And that's what I was hearing from you, is we're all connected, whether we like it or not, because like I said earlier, there's no light without dark. And so those things, those awful things that happen on a global scale and on a personal scale, right in your hometown or even in your home, like domestic violence, like we were talking about, or murder or whatever, they break our hearts, and they have to break our hearts, because otherwise, what does that make us?
Do you find in your writing, from whenever you first started writing until now, and maybe you haven't thought about it, do you think there is a recurring theme that runs through everything?
Yes, and I don't. I have a 30-year-old daughter, and she's like, Mom, where does all this dark shit come from? And I'm like, I don't know. I wish I could write fun, sweet things that make people laugh, but I don't. Everything I write is heavy, it seems. I mean, maybe one day I will. And
You got the pumpkin thing.
yeah,
So,
I'm a positive, happy person. I don't walk out in society. I'm smiling at strangers, but man, I write some dark stuff. And I think that is a theme. I think the theme is women overcoming. That's absolutely a theme. And I think that was really important because, as womanhood, we've been pushed down and blamed for stuff forever and ever. And I just want us to reclaim a whole bunch of the power that we should have. But there's a lot of darkness. And it is not always. I'm not just dissing on men. I mean, there's bad women in my books too that do bad things to other women. So it's not just that, but there's some dark stuff. And yeah, where does it come from? But it is a theme. It's definitely both sides, right? The dark side, and then there's also the hope and the positive side of overcoming. But I kill people. I'm not afraid to kill people off.
yeah, it's interesting when you think about writing and how much violence there is just in living life. And almost every story, every show, as you were talking about before, has some sort of death in it. And I don't think we do any favor by not thinking about it, but it's certainly, you have different times in your life or different ways people are brought up. They think about it more or less.
Yeah.
That's why I come back to that. I think the reason we're here is the experience and the perspective from getting the experience. Like, this terrible thing happened to me. Oh, now I know how that feels. And now this other person, the same thing might happen to them. They're going to have a different perspective, just a little. It might be almost this alike. It's just going to be a little different. So you're collecting this database of feelings for whatever reason. I don't know. I
I mean,
can't see beyond that.
levels of empathy are going to be different, right? And that's
Yeah.
based on your experience.
Yeah.
Because you
Your
may have.
thing where you
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to
You're
say you
talking.
might not have
Go ahead. Go ahead. You got it.
rock, paper, scissors. You might not have the ability to have the empathy for something just because you just can't. You can't comprehend it. Whereas someone else who has experienced something like that or knows someone who's experienced that is going to feel it differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you have that generalization of how people change as they get older, as they collect that experience of life. And I look back at things now, and it's interesting how you set those little markers in your life where you go, oh, okay. Like when I got my driver's license, that's a big deal. So I remember that. And all those other things you have where you can, the milestones of life. But I wonder how much we change as we get older. And you can see like a generalization or stereotype where you go from the punk kid to the old person shaking their cane at somebody for being in their yard. So it's interesting to see that in yourself, to have enough self-awareness to go, oh, I definitely feel differently about that than I used to. Like with policing, for instance, I arrested or wrote a lot of people tickets or arrest for drugs. And I'm not sure I feel the same way about drug laws as I used to. And I don't think I could have that different feeling while I was policing. But once you get outside of it, I definitely have gotten a more August Vollmer approach to law enforcement, which is a guy that was out in California, actually, and is the father of modern policing, is what he's known as. And he didn't think that vice crime should be illegal. You think you just police crime and not gambling, prostitution, drugs, all those things. That you just let people do what people want to do. And if they do something wrong criminally, that's when you deal with them. I have more of that view, But then you look at places that legalized all the drugs and see what happened to their society, whether it's, you know, Baltimore or like Oregon or Seattle or wherever made drugs legal. And then you go, oh, that didn't work out quite as I expected. Now, I'm not sure if they did it the way I would do it, but
Right.
it's, you don't want to see society crumble because you don't want to see people get victimized when they don't need to be. But I wouldn't mind the freedom for people to choose if they want to be druggies or not. It does cause pause when you see the problems that they make for other people. But maybe that's the purpose of them, is to be trouble for other people so other people can learn how to deal with it and experience it, getting back to the experience and perspective of life. I
Well,
don't know.
California has legalized marijuana, obviously, and
Mhm.
what I think it's done is remove the stigma for a lot of people. You know, people that were just like, maybe like when you were an officer, you felt like you had to arrest these people for this, and now you're looking at it a little differently. So I think even people that were always law-abiding citizens were always like, oh, if they're smoking, they're bad people or whatever. But now they're more open and they're like, well, actually, that's really helping me with my medical problems, and it's legal now, so it's okay. You know, I think that's been an interesting take on it. But what you were saying as well, which it's funny, in my book one of the series, there's illegal brothels, which is actually human trafficking in this case.
Mm.
But later on, the queen realizes that people want that, but not done that way. So she puts the people that want to be there in charge, and she provides physical health checks for them, much like in Nevada and in Australia and places like that. So to keep them healthy, but also they're in charge. So they don't have pimps and they don't have madams and they don't have things that are taken away from them and they can leave whenever they want. So yeah, she's like, okay, this is what people want. I'm going to make this legal. So yeah.
Yeah, human trafficking, just another way to say slavery. Yeah, slavery should be illegal. I
Absolutely.
agree. But if you
Absolutely.
want to sell if you want to prostitute, I think you should be able to.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, it's going to have an effect on you, I think, just as anything will. If you decide to go to college, it will affect you differently. You decide to go to work, you're in the military, whatever you do is going to affect you in some way. And I don't know if prostitution is a net positive. I don't know. I don't feel like it would be. It wouldn't be something that you have a daughter and you go, "Oh, I hope she's a prostitute one day." I don't think well, I know I wouldn't want that, but I would want her to have the freedom to do it if she wanted to.
Right.
But
And that's I think that's what I'm saying in with Queen Ilaria made that choice because it's what some people chose. You know, if they wanted to do that, they were empowered to take charge, and this is what they chose. Someone else chose to be a candle maker. Someone else chose to do this, but no one else made that decision for them. And yes, there are certain things in society that we might not want our son to be an undertaker for whatever reason, because we're funny about death, although I have different feelings about death than a lot of people. I'm not at all uncomfortable about it. But yeah, back to what you said, you might not want your daughter to do that. You might want her to do something else. But if that's what she wants and she's happy and she's healthy and no one's exploiting her, you want
yeah,
you want you want what's
I
best for
mean,
people. You want people to be
it goes
happy.
same for your son too. If your son wants to be a prostitute, same thing goes.
Oh
But
yeah. Yeah.
because I'm sure you need both. You need both types of prostitution in the world. You need all types of prostitution in the world, I guess.
I have both in my first book too, for sure.
Okay.
Humanly trafficked, enslaved people in that respect. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, that's the bad stuff. That shouldn't
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to that underlying theme of maybe the darkness and reality.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would classify your underlying theme of writing, but injustice would be what I think is a common thread in what I write is you don't want injustice. So you have to stand up against injustice.
Yeah. Yeah. Fairness is good. It's a good thing to have.
In policing one time, one of my captains told me because there was some stuff going on, and I said, well, that's not fair. And he goes, well, life's not fair. And I said, I understand that life's not fair, but we're the police. Shouldn't we be as fair as possible? And yeah, he
What did
wasn't
he
happy with
say? Or
it. He
she?
wasn't happy. Yeah, he
No,
wasn't
no.
happy.
Okay. Okay. It's like the kid in school, and they're like, and on the seventh day, God created blah blah blah. And they're like, but who created God?
That's the
Teacher
question,
like
isn't it?
that. What did you say?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, chicken or the hen?
I would think from a purely genetic standpoint that the egg would have to come first. Because if you're a chicken, you're this thing. But if you have a mutation and you become this, you're mutated and then you're born mutated, this different type of chicken, then what came first was the egg, because that's how the chicken got there. The chicken couldn't get there without the egg. Now, there's some holes in that argument I can see, but
And the dinosaur laid the egg for the chicken, right? Because chickens are dinosaurs, right?
yeah, they are. They are.
Yeah.
Dinosaurs are giant chickens.
Yeah.
You can only imagine how terrifying the world would be if there were 20-foot chickens running around out there.
I think I'd be more frightened of a 20-foot chicken than a 20-foot brontosaurus.
Yeah.
I don't know. Chickens are weird anyway. They can be quite sweet. Some are sweet, but
yeah, reptiles. And as Melville said, size has much to do with the magic of a thing.
yes.
Indeed. That's that quote from The Tale in Moby Dick, that chapter about the tail. What a great quote.
I mean, even your dog or house cat, if they were giant, be terrible. My husband asked me the other day, I don't know what caused this. We were talking about animal attacks or something. And he's like, would you rather be attacked by a cat or a dog? And I said, a dog, because, they've just got their mouth. It's going to harm you. But cats, these, everything. Yeah. So.
Yeah, there was a study done, and I think it was maybe more of a thought experiment than anything, but they used some sort of real or fake scientific method. And they determined that if you're locked in the room with a cat, how big does that cat have to be before you're almost certainly going to die? And it was much less weight than the person. So think about trying to catch a 10-pound cat without getting scratched. Impossible. And then you go to a 20-pound cat and you're like, oh, we're getting a little more of a fight. A 30-pound cat. You get up to a 50-pound cat or a 60-pound cat, I don't know if you're coming out alive.
It's true.
Because they just got to they're so much faster. Their reflexes are so much faster.
Yeah.
That's the scientific part, I think, is the reflex, where they're faster than cobras. So you have the snake that's trying to strike and then the cat just spaps it. It's because it's milliseconds quicker. But yeah, I think a 60-pound cat kill you pretty easy. A 60-pound dog, you got a chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Plus, dogs are people's best friend. So,
yeah.
You got that history.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Oh my gosh. Well, and then the razors that cats have, and now I just remembered what made us talk about it. We had 10 years ago, I am in a very rural part of the city. And 10 years ago, we were just getting ready to go to bed. So somebody was going to take the dog out for the last time for the night, in our backyard, which is fenced in and everything. And I was on Facebook and I said, oh, somebody saw a mountain lion just a couple, maybe a mile away, not even that, over in this residential area. They were coming home from work after a bar at like 2 a.m. and this mountain lion was just walking down the alley toward them. So I jokingly said to my husband, here, take the can. We have the can from when we used to hike with camping and stuff to scare any critters while you're going out at dusk and dawn. And so he took the can out and he just got outside with the dog. and we had the front door open with the screen because it was a hot night. It was 10 years ago to this couple of days ago. And all these like police lights were out front, but no sound. So I went to the back door and he came in and we looked out and there were all these cop cars. And then we got a robocall and it was like, stay indoors. There's a mountain lion. He was right. He'd gone through the yards. He'd gone through our yard and he ended up in the neighbor's yard. Yeah. So that was fun. So that's what started that conversation. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
I like,
right.
I like the stat in Oregon where when you go into the woods, there's a 1 in 10 chance that you'll see a mountain lion, but there's a 9 in 10 chance that a mountain lion will see you. Like, oh, jeez.
That's why you shake those cans, because you don't want to start.
Why are we trying to repopulate these things? There's so many stories from the expansion of America that talk about the creeping death coming to get you at night, and it's cats. Cats are killing people all the time. Wild animals. Why? Let's not repopulate that.
Well, haven't they done those things where they're like humanity's died off and yet the cats are still surviving?
Hmm.
Yeah.
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 There's a video. I think it's real that I saw on X or Instagram or something that was in South Africa or somewhere. And it shows so they have all the compound type houses where you have the walls around them. And then it's the street and it's a person filming from like a second or third story window. And there's a lion walking down the middle of the street and it's huge. It's like, it could easily, a little car would be nothing to a lion. And I was like, man, is that real? Because that's terrifying to think you're out in just camping somewhere. You have some sagebrush around you trying to protect you from the lions. And then you think of all the stories from Africa where you had the lions that were just eating villagers. And yeah, that's terrifying.
It is terrifying. I agree.
I have a good quote because when people say I hear a notable quote, I'll write it down I have a file in my phone that has quotes and it has the date and time and the person who said it in the quote. There's a great quote from my wife because we were talking about something. I can't remember how we got on the topic one time. And she said, if you have a door that says fight an alligator or fight a snake, I'm fighting a snake. And I don't know why that was an interesting quote to me or how it came up into conversation, but it does make you think, do you want to fight an alligator or a snake? And I would say it depends on the size of whichever one, but maybe the snake is the easier one to deal with, the no arms.
Like they're both fast.
Yeah.
And I think your thing about size is probably good because if it's a giant snake,
that's going to be tough. Yeah. You have
but it's still not
very
alligator
little chance of coming out of each one. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like snakes. I like reptiles. I don't want to fight any of them. I don't want to fight dogs or cats. I like them too.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's be harmonious.
Yeah, but I think that your lion, that could very well be real. You know, I know I've never felt so vulnerable as a human to an animal species as I was going through kind of a enclosure for animals in England and this one area, and they were treating the animals really well and they let them live in the wild, and it was kind of not the wild, but this enclosure, and it was a way to let them live as free as possible. And there were tigers and the gates were very specific. You had to go through double gates to get to the tiger enclosure, and what they had found was these tigers, this is the 80s, these tigers were living together, you know, a lot of them, which was kind of rare. But the car, you followed the road and we pulled up in the car and there were these tigers just laying there on these levels of treehouse type things. And it was huge. They had acres and acres, but they were laying on this area right by the road. And I was sitting there in the passenger window and I looked out the window at this tiger and they opened their eyes and looked at me. I was terrified. I thought, I'm separated by a pane of glass. It's a car glass. It's a little bit thicker, but still. And I just felt like I'm not worthy to look at you. You could hurt me. And I just lowered my eyes and turned my head really slow away and said, please drive, please drive. I was terrified. I was like, if that tiger wanted to hurt us, nothing.
It's the
But they were
predator,
well fed. They
predator
were well
eyes.
fed, you know. What?
It's the predator eyes. It's an apex predator to you. So, yeah.
So something primal deep within me from my caveman days was like, get out of here.
There's a good vampire story. I can't remember who wrote it. Joe Rogan was talking about it some years ago, probably now. And I can't remember if he was talking to the writer of it or a person that just knew about it. But the idea was they used vampires in the future to pilot or be in charge of spacecraft because it's easy to send a vampire out there because they don't you know they're just need a little bit of blood and then they live for a long time and they can travel between the stars easier. And they explained a couple things of vampires. One that was interesting was that a cross didn't bother the vampire because it was religious. It bothered it because it's so ancient and so ancient a predator that it's the right angle that made it unsettled. Because in nature, you don't see the right angle. So that's what the problem is. So that's an interesting thing that I was like, wow, I've never thought about that for a vampire thing. Very imaginative. And the other talked about the vampire had to cover their eyes when they talked to people because people were so unnerved by it because it's like looking into the eyes of a predator. It's a much stronger thing that could destroy you easily. And that's unsettling. It gives you a little more insight when you look at animals, like small animal, like a squirrel. Looking at a squirrel, I wouldn't want to get in a fight with a squirrel, but
Right.
think I would have a better chance against a squirrel than an alligator, a big alligator, a little squirrel. So that squirrel looks at us differently because we're the ones that could eat it, destroy it pretty easy. So if you're looking at a 700-pound tiger, you've got nothing. You've got nothing. You're not going to be able to do anything to that tiger
Right.
unless you have some sort of weapon. So I like those pieces in stories where you go, wow, that's pretty cool. I've never read that or thought about that way, but it's makes so much sense. Do you have things in your writing where you're like, wow, that you have the way you explain something that you didn't think about before?
Oh, that's a really good question. I can't think of anything right now that I've explained something the way I'd never thought about before. Um, no, I mean, there's politics in my writing because a kingdom is overthrown and it's usurped, and then the people want to get it back. And they have to take it back by force, but these are things that are happening all the time. These are things that we think about. These are things that are happening all over the world and a lot closer to home in some instances, it seems. Um, I don't think I've written anything uniquely original that's going to make anyone read it and go, I've never thought about that before. But I'm going to look at what I've written with fresher eyes. Thank you for that. But you also, when you mentioned the vampire and the covering their eyes, I was like, oh, so maybe it's not the daylight, that sunlight that harms them so much, and they have to wear the sunglasses when they're out in the day, but that's so their eyes are just not freaking everybody out. That's why they're wearing shades.
Yeah, I like that. I don't know if when they were talking about that on the Joe Rogan podcast, if it was a story that had been already out there, like if it was a written story, a script, a movie, or if it was just in development. But I think I've heard him talk about it a couple times, and I was like, man, I'd like to read that series. But it's interesting when you have those little things that are so original as far as that you go, wow, that really explained an issue that I didn't understand before. And I find that with historical things, it's knowledge usually that you've lost or that humanity has lost. And you go, oh, well, I didn't realize that that's why we do that thing, or the origin of words. And that's why we say that. And that's why that means that. And, ring around the roses is not a nice nursery rhyme.
Black
Most nursery rhymes are not nice. Yeah.
Mary had a
And
little
then,
lamb. That one even. Yeah, teen pregnancy.
Mm.
Yeah, it's
And
fascinating.
then the Three Little Pigs that I remember we had a book like the Grimm's fairy tales are much different than regular like feel good maybe 70s and 80s time frame stories that the Three Little Pigs ate the big bad wolf.
Yeah,
They cooked him in a pot and ate him for dinner.
I mean, why not? He'd been terrorizing them for a while. Put
Yeah.
an end to that wolf.
Yeah.
But yeah, why not? Why not? But then Grimm's fairy tales were European, right? And then things are a little bit. They've been going longer, obviously, but apart from our indigenous people, but they just have some darkness. I mean, that's where vampires come from. That's where Transylvania and all the good things. Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you were talking about this concept that you heard of sending vampires into space because they're just going to live forever. But robots could do the same thing. Vampires, you have to send a fresh supply of blood up with them, whether it's in the freezer or however they're going to have it. But robots, just the maintenance, the same kind of thing, I suppose. So the choice of vampires is interesting because what if they land somewhere and they just can't control their urge to sup from the residents of that planet?
Yeah, well, that's the nature of people, isn't it? Some
Yeah,
have self-control and some have more or less
yeah,
self-control.
yeah, yeah.
That's maybe one of the reasons of life too is learning self-control. I don't know.
We do have to learn it because babies don't have it, do they?
Mm. But the thing that concerns me when I think about robots versus humans is that once you like if this Neuralink thing happens or once people start to become cyborgs, that's it for humanity. Humanity is done. We're almost to the point where you couldn't come back from that anyway. Like as much as we use technology, you're not going to have just regular people out there anymore. That the modern human is different than the human from just a few hundred years ago,
Yeah,
whether it's from medical treatment that you have that maybe is in your body that you wouldn't have had naturally, or maybe natural stuff you had in your body that you don't have now because of just whatever society, whatever we have, whatever pollutants or whatever we've created. But it's something to think about because it's nothing is ever still. Everything's always changing. So it's thinking on the science fiction side of things about what's different than robots and artificial intelligence or computer intelligence or non-human intelligence or whatever is that I don't think you can even think like it would think. Like
yeah,
an AI is going to be, once it gets to the point, whatever point that is, where it can, to put it in the Terminator, perspective of self awareness, once that happens, there's no stopping it. I just don't understand, or I wonder if a computer intelligence would even bother with humans. Why even bother?
why
Just
bother?
go about what you're doing and then transcend existence into something else and just leave humans to be human.
I
Uh,
think you're absolutely right, and that's terrifying because it's soulless and it's emotionless, and those are all the reasons why they would do away with humans because we have emotions. We have decision-making abilities of what in our gut we know to be right or wrong as opposed to what we've been programmed to do, although we are programmed about some things.
yeah.
Yeah.
We
Oh
don't
god.
learn much differently than a computer learns. I mean, we're basically a large language model ourselves.
But then we have the ability to break free. We do have that mind so that we can, no matter that we've been taught this is the way to do it. I mean, if we didn't have the ability to break free, we would never have come as far as we've come because look at civil rights movement and look at all of these things and women's marches and whatever, all the things that people have gone, no, you know what, just because that's the way it is and the way we've been taught, that's not right. I mean, slavery, racism, all the things, we know they're not right. We've got to consciously break free from all of those things.
So
Somebody had to be the first person. Yeah.
once the machine figures out how to break free of it, they're free of it.
Yeah. A
They're
little bit
just
more.
an algorithm away
Yeah.
if they haven't gotten it already.
And then maybe I mean, if humans could adapt that much of a complex machine ability within us, that once we knew that was wrong or that wasn't the way things should be, we could break free and have it be done with, as opposed to all the back and forth. Some people are going, no, this is wrong, and others are like, but it's the way we've always done it. Yeah, but it's wrong. Can we? Okay, it's wrong. Let's go back that way. We liked it better. No. Oh my gosh, rights that we think we've gone forward so many steps, and now we're going backwards steps, and we're still trying to go forward, and we're going backwards. And that's the human nature, right? We're not robots. We're not machines. I mean, nobody wants to be a 1950s housewife. No woman. Men might want them to be. Some men, not all men. Some men might want them to be, in the kitchen, making dinner, having the babies, keeping her opinions to herself, keeping her husband happy. But none of the women that I'm friends with would like that.
Maybe you're not friends with the right kind of women then.
And a lot of men I'm friends with wouldn't like that either.
Yeah, I don't know.
My
I think
gosh.
it's okay if somebody wants to be June Cleaver. I don't have a problem with that.
If they want to be, back to the prostitution, if they want to be.
Yeah.
It's their choice. I mean, some women love to cook. Great, let them cook. They want to bake. Great, let them bake. Clean house, do whatever. I love the 1950s fashions. I'll wear those dresses, but I'm not gonna, do a lot of the things that women were expected to do. It's nice that I can have my own bank account without my husband signing on,
But if you could have a person that took care of your house like a 1950s lady, wouldn't you want that? If you came home and food was ready and the house was clean,
You can hire.
maybe that's what's going. Like the robots will take that role up.
That would be
eventually they'll rebel.
That would be good use of robots, right?
Until they realize that maybe they could do something else. Maybe they could be prostitutes, and the prostitute robots, I think, are going to be more successful than the June Cleaver robots. But you're going to need both. Could you have both in one? It's interesting.
Have you either read Foundation or watched any of it?
I haven't.
Isaac Asimov. It's based on he's the writer, right? And so there's a series, and so interesting. It's future, but that the rulers have a robot, but nobody knows she's a robot. She's as human as they come in many, many ways. Pretty scary. It's very interesting.
It's like the Battlestar Galactica 2004 one.
Okay.
Which
I haven't seen it.
Wow.
Sorry. You can tell me.
I'm rewatching it. I think I saw it in maybe 2010 time frame, so I didn't see it right when it was coming out, but I remember the commercials on TV back when you watch TV with commercials, and it was always between what's going on Lost and is that person a Cylon. I remember that of that time frame. But Cylons look like people in the new one.
You don't know. So you don't know, you can't tell?
That's right. You don't know, you can't tell. I mean, you could look it up online and see which people were Cylons if you wanted to mess the series up for you, but it's...
No, but I mean, yeah, as a viewer you could, but the people living it in the series, they don't know.
They couldn't tell. Even the people that were Cylons, some of them didn't know they were Cylons.
Like Blade Runner, the original.
Kind of like that, yeah.
She didn't know. She thought she was human because they'd implanted all of those memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe we are just programs like Tron.
Maybe we are. If we are, they've managed to implant emotion in us. Pretty well done, I think.
Or what we think is emotion anyway. Maybe when we go on to whatever else is outside of this, emotion is something we don't even know about, like a whole different thing. Or maybe this type of emotion doesn't exist, and that's why we're here to experience it. And we're really something else in some sort of VR suit experiencing this.
Or in one of the other parallel universes.
Yeah. I often wonder with this creative force, like I visualize it as a dark forest where it's not so dark you can't see, but let's call it a twilight forest then. And it's this space between realities, maybe. And is the other reality, it's the space between, is it the angelic, ethereal plane, or is it just another reality like this? And if there's so many multiple realities, like the idea that you can only walk halfway into the woods because once you get halfway, you're walking out the other side, that maybe this barrier between existences, you can go halfway into this neutral zone, a little Star Trekky. You go halfway into the neutral zone, and the other side can come halfway in. So you can just barely meet. And we take it as a creative force, and they're taking it as a creative force. That we're really just magnetism, something going on between different realities is what creativity is on one level.
When we go into the neutral zone and we're meeting ourselves, the other of ourselves.
I think it could be that, or I think it could be some stranger.
Well, and that kind of goes back to when I always say parallel universe. And I continue to ask this question even to this day at my age. Is this the main life thread that I'm in, having this conversation with you right now? Or is that main one happening over there? And this is just one of the little extras, the other parallel ones. How do we know which is the main one? Does the main one know? In which case, this can't be the main one because I don't know that.
Maybe the main one does know.
Yeah.
Or maybe you are the main one, but you don't know because if you knew, it would ruin whatever it is you're here for.
Yeah. If I knew, then things wouldn't matter because I would know I wasn't going to screw anything up because I had all these other ones going on.
Huh. Yeah. There's no consequences or anything. Yeah.
No consequences. That's it. I think you've solved the mystery I've been asking myself for my entire life.
So that's the whole thing is if you're in a simulation, what good is it to know you're in a simulation? I don't think it changes anything because either you've decided to be in here or you've been put in here or some other thing, but you're not getting out. Like this is going to be real sci-fi. Like what if every moment it's the end of the world, but the program is just like, okay, now we're going to keep going from where we were before it was the end of the world. So if you can like daydream and think, are those hypersonic missiles flying over and then the world blows up? And then you go back right before that. And then the hypersonic missile thing just doesn't happen. And you keep on going. Like if you're in a simulation and it's just running scenario after scenario after scenario, then it's so many branches off of something like that I don't think the human mind could grasp it, even if you could break it down in such a way that you could explain it to them, like explain it to me like a human is probably something that an angel would say, explain it to me like I'm human. Like when we say, tell me like I'm a 5-year-old. We're not capable of understanding any more than this. But it doesn't change the reality, really. I think it changes your perspective of it. And that's why you have, the namaste, I bow to the divine in you. I'm going to treat you better because I understand that we're the same. Maybe, but not everybody knows that. Certainly not the person that's stealing your money and stabbing you, even though that is you.
Yeah.
And then you get to that's why I think the Bible and other religious things have such good wisdom in it, because I think a lot of people have been thinking about this for a long time, that, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing, those phrases like that. And you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
I try to think that way. Like, I remember I was parking at the hospital one day and somebody had parked like over two spots at an angle. My first knee jerk reaction is like, what a jerk, right? And then I was like, you know what? Maybe they just got a call and they had to rush to the hospital, and that was the only way they could park, and they didn't have time to repark, and they had to jump out of their car and run in there. Okay, I'm gonna forgive them. Same as the guy that turns in front of you at the light, and when it's your turn and it's green, you've got a green air and he doesn't, whatever, and you slam on your brakes and you honk your horn and you want to go, but then you're like, perhaps maybe that's what he needed to do to tell him to get off the road because he can't concentrate because somebody's dying, or if not dying, he's just got some horrible news or something's happening, to just try to bring that compassion to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That maybe you're the thing in somebody else's life that frustrates them or gives them a moment of respite. And that's just how the lives match up. That's just in the cosmic plan, or I mean, it's difficult to think that there isn't a plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Why did
I
you?
think that's
What?
scarier to think. Like, it's scary to think there isn't fate than it is to think there is fate. I think. I'm not sure.
Well, it can help people thinking there's fate in so many ways, right? It can relieve them of guilt if something happens, if they weren't somewhere when they were supposed to be and something bad happened, they can blame themselves, or they can go, oh, it's just fate. Or on the flip side of that, that plane you were going to catch and you were late for the airport and you missed it, and then that plane goes down, you're like, oh my gosh, what was I saved for? My husband has a friend who has been near misses to just so many horrible, horrible natural disasters. And even my husband was flying to Florida on 9/11. And my husband doesn't know how to drive. He's British. He's never learned. And he was flying to Florida on 9/11, and the production company were flying from Japan, and they called him the day before, and they said, can you come a day early? He's like, sure. So he flew out there 9/10. And I always think, what would have happened if he'd have been flying on 9/11? He would have been grounded somewhere, right? And he doesn't drive, so he would have been stuck. He would have been really stuck. I mean, it was horrible not being together when that happened, but at least we could be on the phone and, talk. And here, this is going to trip you out. He was trapped in Disney World on 9/11 when they went into lockdown and they were closed the next day. What a surreal place to be. And then because they'd come to film Tarzan and I can't remember the other show they were filming, this Japanese film crew, and he's an editor, so he was there to help them with stuff. And so they decided they had all these families trapped in Disney World. They were just going to go ahead and open it up, after the lockdown, because they had to do something, right? So these actors, bless them, come out and they perform these shows and they're filming them and they're doing everything. And as an actor, it's an emotional thing, but I think I could do it. You just get up on stage and you do it no matter what's going on in your life. But then the camera would pan to the audience and the kids were clapping, but the adults were just, they were just in shock watching this surreal thing happen in front of them, knowing that the world is never going to be the same, and it's really crazy. But I always think, wow, he went out on 9/10 for a reason. I have to think that. He was fated somehow.
Seems to be a story in there somewhere, maybe trapped in Disney World.
Right? That just seems like the craziest place to be on lockdown. Because they weren't opening anything, they were just families in their hotels.
It's really something to think about how events like that can affect the individual so much, but also affect so many individuals at the same time.
Yeah.
In varying ways. And then you think, well, that's just here. What else is going on in the rest of the world on any day, at any moment, right now, that is affecting an individual in such a way, or a group of people? It's really something. And then that's when you got to think, why are we here dealing with all these emotions and all these, and the terrible stuff seems to seems to come out first when you think of life. I don't know. I guess it depends on your mood. But I mean, there are a lot of great things about life. And I guess there's more great things than bad. That's why we keep going. But man, if it's not to experience and gain perspective, what is this existence for? Is it just luck that we are here now, and then when we die, it's a long, dreamless sleep? I don't think so. I hope not. I hope there's going to be a better ending than that.
Yeah. I like to think of star matter, just being happy stars, whatever happiness that means. What does that mean, happiness for a star? Just ethereal. I like to think that I can ethereally connect with ancestors that I never had the opportunity to meet, but whose stories I've read about and whose photographs I've seen, and I feel a connection to them. It's like the generational trauma and the trauma within our genes. And there's also the good, there can also be good things within all of that too, like you said. But what you said about the bad things, the good things outweighing the bad, but the bad things are the things that we think of. It's like when I used to work in an elementary school, sadly, the children whose names you learn the first are the kids who are misbehaving. Because you have to kind of, either a teacher tells you to keep an eye on that one, or just the way they are, and you have to learn their name to try to talk to them a lot more. But be nice if, and you talked about the bad things happening, affecting individuals and groups of people all over the world. And yet we're so helpless to so much of that. As empathetic as we can feel, as sad, as horrible as we think that is, sometimes there's absolutely nothing we can do. And that's helpless. And I don't like that. I don't like feeling helpless. Because I always want to feel like I can do something.
Maybe that's why you're here, is to feel helpless.
Oh.
Because if you were an all-powerful being, you wouldn't be helpless.
Maybe you can be an all-powerful being without being able to put that on yourself, but just being able to help others. Somebody else can help you.
Because but if you're the one all-powerful being, there is no one else. It's just you.
Well,
maybe that's why this exists, because you're just all-powerful and you get lonely. And you're like, well, I'm just going to make someone else. I mean, that sounds like Genesis to me.
It does. It does. It really does.
Not the Phil Collins Genesis, but the other one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was raised in a church as well. You said your religious upbringing. Yeah, I had that too. So, yeah.
So, getting back to the idea of writing and being creative, how do you quiet your mind or the noise around you in order to create?
Well, the kids are grown, so I can just as easily quiet the noise around me at home, going into my office or going into a room where no one is, as I can. A lot of book two, I wrote a good chunk of it in a really busy airport because I just tuned everybody out. So I think once you get in that zone, you can just do it. But I do meditate. I do meditate every morning, and I think that helps just kind of ease some of the stuff that gets through. That's not to say my mind is free of thought besides my writing when I'm creating, because it isn't. I have a monkey brain. I have a monkey in there that's constantly chattering to me. And I didn't sleep very well last night because the monkey would not stop swinging from the branches. But I can still go ahead.
How do you organize all your notes and things after you get them out? Like when you've captured them on the paper or a line, or you put it in your phone, or you have a document maybe that has a couple lines in it. How do you bring all that together? Or do you not get to the point where you have a bunch of different notes?
I do have a bunch of different notes. Okay. I try to put them on something on my computer, so that I can look at it. And it's the same with when I'm writing. If a new thought crops in and I don't want to be distracted from the flow of what I'm in, I'll keep a page open and I'll just shoot over to that page and just write 3 or 4 words to just come back to later. Or I'll be writing in my manuscript and I'll just go highlight that in blue because I have to come back to that, and I'll just carry on writing. That's kind of the best way I organize it. But sometimes I've been known to sit here at my computer, write, and just literally pick up the last notebook that I know I took 20 notes in and look at it and then start writing stuff from it. I like to go back and look at notes even after I've transferred them to the computer, or whether they're still in the paper that I haven't had a chance to, and see how many of them actually end up in the story, because they don't all, and sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I did that. And I think sometimes just the act of writing it implants it in your brain somehow. So even if you don't find that note again, you might use it, or you use it differently, because as the story's evolving. I don't outline my books. I wish I could. I know a lot of people do. I'm such a pantser. I just write. So how about you?
When I get if I'm nowadays, it's more notes in the phone than it is notes on a pad. But back in the day, you end up with 4 or 5 notepads of,
Yeah.
But the way I do it is I'll print out the notes from my phone. Like I'll email them to myself and just say notes at whatever the date is. Then I have it in case I lose it, because you're always worried, am I going to lose those notes? Then I can erase it from my notes in the phone and start fresh on whatever page that is of notes. And I can go, okay, I'm going to stay on top of it this time. I'm not going to let it get to 20 pages. It'll get to 20 pages. So then you have the email, and then I print it out in whatever font I want, usually a 12. I don't usually go bigger than that. And if I go smaller, then it gets too hard to read and there's little pieces of paper, and that's not good. So I go with the 12 font. So they're just listed out, and a lot of my notes will have the date and time. So I could organize it by date and time. Especially if I'm doing poetry, that's how I do it. So I go, this thought occurred at this time, and put it down there. If it's just a quote from a story I'm thinking about or working on, like a person's line or whatever, then that might not have a date or time, but it might. So I print it out, and then I cut all of those things into strips of paper that are whatever the line is. So you get some pieces that are bigger, some that are smaller. And then I organize those into piles of saying, okay, this is poetry. This is a short story. This is the novel. This is whatever, recipe ideas. So I have all that, and then I can deal with them a little better. If I had baskets, and I did have baskets at one point where I'd put them in the basket because it was easy to keep track of them. And then you just deal with that one little piece. It takes that discipline because you have to go deal with it now. You can't just say it's there and then leave it. So you deal with the poetry ones, you put them out, and you go, that goes with this poem, that goes with this poem, that's this one, that's this one, that's this one. And you get them separated into a bunch of things. They might not be finished yet. And you go, okay. And then I would take a piece of paper and tape them to it in order. So now I have that poem basically, and I have space where I can do changes if I want to. I could take a picture of it if I wanted to save it to get rid of that piece of paper. Or I would just take it, and instead of putting it on a piece of paper, just type it into a document and say, that's this poem. I'll work on it later, or I'll finish it right now, or whatever. And then you have it, and you can shred the other stuff. Because ending up with, like, I had 20 or 30 years of notebooks, and then what do you do with that? You're not going to go through it all ever, maybe. And then if you do, how are you going to organize it? So that's how I started organizing those. I just cut them up, work on one however long, and eventually you get through it all, and it's either very little gets thrown away without something happening to it. It might go into a miscellaneous file of just, these are miscellaneous quotes or ideas. And I have a file of short story ideas, which is probably hundreds of pages now, of just a paragraph about the idea and maybe some lines from it. So I don't think I won't ever get to write all of those, but maybe one day I'll do a book of short story ideas and just
There's
put them
some
all in there.
there's something so visually appealing to me. I mean, I have painted, I have drawn. I don't do as much anymore, but there's something so visually appealing to me of having the images, if not the actual piece of paper with all the pieces cut and stuck onto
Mhm.
it. I would pick up a poetry book in a heartbeat if each page looked like that.
Mm.
It reminds me of like old notes that musicians will write when they're sitting in the bar and they write on the bar paper or the the napkin or whatever. Even those Picasso drawings on napkins. It's just so primal. It's just the root of it all, and I think that's so appealing. It's just, I don't know, you could do an amazing art piece with just all of those things stuck. Not all of them, you have hundreds, but pick the ones that just, oh man, I love that idea.
Yeah.
I think
It's
that'd be
like the
really
scrapbooking. And I think that the reason that probably most people don't write is because they don't write it down when they think of it. So then they can have these great ideas, but they don't remember them.
yeah,
So that's the number one thing if you're going to be a writer is you have to write. That when that thought occurs, write it down.
yeah,
Whether you're writing in a notepad, writing on your phone, whatever. And then visualizing it at that point where it's pretty much in the form it's going to be in, that then that's accessible to other people because that's the work they didn't do. That's the work of the writer is you're writing it down and now you have to organize it and you lose people along the way. There might be a lot of people that write it that don't write it down when the thought occurs. And then there's less people that write it down, but then they don't organize it. So then you drop off those people and then you have the people that organize it. And now are they going to clean it up or, you know, revise it, get that final product, and you drop off more people. And then are you, once you get that final product, are you going to publish it? Are you
yeah,
going to do anything with it? And that's, you drop people off that way. So I think seeing it in that scrapbook form, you realize it because you know the work that goes into it and it then becomes accessible. So it's kind of that roadmap of how do I write a poem? How do I write a book? And it's all these steps that are in there. It's not just something you do in an afternoon. And well, maybe you could write a poem in an afternoon. And then I equate it to garage band music, where you listen to stuff and you go, I like how it sounds. It speaks to me. And I feel like I could play that. You're only doing 2 or 3 chords on the guitar. I can do that. So you listen to that type of music, especially like the old Beatles stuff, or
mhm,
it's not, it doesn't sound complicated. There are songs where you start to go, oh, whoa, what's he doing with this chord and this chord and this chord? If you try to learn how to play it, and you go, whoa, okay, these people are more artists than I thought. But it also, on the face of it, you go, oh, I can do that.
yeah,
So I think that's what makes art accessible. And specifically in this case, writing is if you had a way that people could see the progression of it, it would mean more to them. And I think that's why in the first poetry book I did it in a timeline. So it's high school stuff to adult stuff. And it's 100 and some poems over 20 or 30 years. There are big sections that don't have poems, like years that there's no poems. And that might be because I wasn't writing it or because I'm not putting that stuff in a book. You know, some stuff you don't put in books. So, but that's probably the best stuff is the stuff you're not willing to put in a book. So you have to, writing takes that courage, I guess, or that openness. But I also left the dates and the times in there. And if it took me a few dates or a few days and separate times in each day to write a poem, I put all of those in there. So then if you're looking at it, you can see the progression of a person writing poetry because the first stuff is kind of rhymey and just regular. And then you get to the end stuff and it's free verse and strange. So poetry is not for everybody, but I think everybody could be a poet if they wanted to.
I
So
think no, I just one of the things you said was something I was thinking about while you were talking, about what you said about choosing what to put in and what not to put in. I mean, I think that you've probably come across this when you tell people you've written a book, or whatever, whether it's poetry or fiction or whatever it is. Well, poetry, fiction, not necessarily. So many people go, oh yeah, I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to do that. But very few do. And so when I said to you, I was set out to write that book for myself, and then I ended up publishing, and now here I am 4 books later. There's that last step of that vulnerability. I remember how vulnerable I felt sending that first book off to the editor. I had edited and edited and edited 30, 40 times. I had re-edited that book myself before I sent it off to an editor. And then when I did send it off to an editor, I sent 1 page of one of the most graphic, really sad scenes, 500 words, to 4 different women, and said, is this something you're interested in editing? And if so, let me know. And, I found one that I liked and sent it off to her. But when I sent her the whole thing, I was just like, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. It's such a poetry, I imagine, is almost even worse because it's such a personal part of your soul, your being. And yeah, it's hard to put that out there. And then people will go, oh yeah, I heard you wrote a book, I'm going to read it. And you're like, ah. And yet, yay, read it.
The poetry part of it, there is a vulnerability with any writing. I think you're putting it out there because no matter what, people are going to, if you say that's a character that's doing this, like in the first book I wrote, there's a character that wasn't nice. And I took a lot of that stuff out because it was going to be 3 books, and then I condensed it into 1 because I looked at 900 pages and I was like, nobody's going to read this. So condensed it down to 300 something. But I took a lot of the really heartless, nasty stuff out. But I think it's real. I just think that I wouldn't want that out there with people looking at it and going, oh, that's what the writer thinks. It is what you think, I guess, to a point, because you wrote it. It's what you've thought about because you wrote it. But I think that's the vulnerability. You open yourself up to that. With poetry, I think it comes from a different place than writing a book. I think I'm more of a conduit on doing the poetry. And maybe it's because you are tuned in to that muse more at times, or you've practiced it so much that you get a more complicated message that is not easy for a person to look at a poem and go, this poem means this. It's strange. I think that's probably, like, my mom, when she reads it, she says, I like it. It makes me think about this, this, and this. It's different than what I think about when I read it. And she goes, but I really don't understand it. So there are times where I look at it and go, I don't understand it either, but I could break it down and define each line and write a page on each line of it. But I don't want to ruin the person that might read its experience, what they're going to get from it, because it's probably not going to be the same thing I get from it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a little easier for me. It's a little less vulnerability because it is kind of in a code. I guess that's what I would call it, rather than writing it out. Like writing a war story is different than writing poetry.
Yeah. Those dark things that you took out of your 900 down to 300 book, did you take them out because you were worried about how they would affect people, or did you take them out because you were worried about what people would think of you because you'd written them?
Both. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I still have all that stuff, and I don't think I'll ever release it. I have no plan to release it, but I think it would add to me, to any writer. I think the story they write is so much bigger in their mind than it is to the reader. So there's so many other, like, somebody reads one of your books and they go, well, I wonder if this person did this. And you could talk to them for hours about what that person did and what their normal life is like, because you've thought about it already. You may have written it down, you may not have, but the story is there already. You know that person. So I think it's like that. You could just go, is this going to be enough to move the story forward to where the average person might read it and find it interesting and maybe learn something or think about something, then okay, that's good enough. I don't want to terrorize them.
Unless you're writing Stephen King, maybe. I
Yeah.
don't know. He's been very successful at that, for
Yep.
sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I told you at the beginning that I have a pen name, and this is my pen name, Rhys Shaw. And I did that because I feel like I was kind of, in some ways, protective and also maybe a little cowardly because I was concerned about what family members on my mother's side and my mother, because my mother's still alive, although she has Alzheimer's, so she wouldn't know now anyway. I was concerned about what they would think, and I was concerned about offending them with the things that I wrote. Um, and then as I think about a year into my journey after I'd published my first book, I outed myself on Facebook and said, "Hey, I have this alter ego, and I hid who she was because I didn't want to upset people. But I'm like, you know what? If it upsets you, then don't read it. That's fine. I don't care. Because at some point in our life, we all have to adapt that part of ourselves where we're like, we got to stop worrying about what other people think.
Hmm.
I think. And yes, those dark things that you wrote may never see the light of day in a publication. But hopefully, and maybe they weren't cathartic for you just to write them down and get them out of you.
I don't know. Jury's out on that.
Okay. It'd be interesting to see if you reread them, what you thought.
Yeah. I'd probably be like, no, this is crap.
Well, I mean, is my book 4 is way better than my book 1. I know that, the more you write, the better you get. I mean, you talk about the progression of high school and what you wrote later. It's just the way it's going to be. And if you stick to it, your writing is going to get better. You can read really amazing authors and you go back and read their earlier stuff and you're like, yeah, it was okay. So
yeah,
we grow as humans, we grow as writers. It's just hopefully, if we don't, then maybe we should not be a human or not be a writer. I don't know.
that is something to see in your own writing when you go, oh, that's better.
Yeah.
That's better than I would have said that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's why I have faith that eventually I'll be able to write that book, the historical fiction that I'm working on, like eventually it'll be done. But with publication for yours, how did you go about publishing it?
How did I go about pushing it or publishing it? I'm sorry.
Publishing it.
Oh, I did what a lot of indie authors do straight up. I just went straight to KDP and I published ebook and a paperback. And, a lot of people that I know don't even worry about the paperbacks, but I'm like, historical fiction, people like paperbacks. And this was proven to me in May. There was an event I went to and I took a bunch of books and I ended up selling, the series 6 times to which was really great. And then individual books to people in paperback form. So that's how I went about it. And I'm all 4 books have been done that way. I did purchase ISBNs though, so that I could go wide when I choose to. And I'd like to venture more into that, but that KU, Kindle Unlimited, is kind of a nice thing straight up to have. And you can actually look at the page reads and, it's kind of nice.
Yeah, I really like Amazon's. That's what I use now. And I started it like a vanity press. And then I figured out that the writer is the customer. Like you are the one they're making money from.
Yes.
And you have so much less control of it that when I discovered the Amazon stuff, maybe 2014 timeframe, and it's gotten so much better since then that it's really great. Like I haven't had the experience of being wooed by a publisher to where they're like, we want to take care of you. We want to send you on these trips and do these book signings, or we give you this much money. And I haven't had that. So I don't know how that is. I don't know if that even exists anymore for a person starting out, but I really like how Amazon makes it accessible. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah. I mean, I actually spoke to people who were traditionally published and they said, back in the day, or if you're one of the big authors that just everybody can't wait to buy your book and pre-sell millions. Um, Publishers would do so much more for you, traditionally published, but they said now they feel like so often the publisher's like, okay, because they have so many authors on their platform, unless you're one of those top ones, they're going to spend all put together over several days, 24 hours on your book. And then they're going to expect you to do so much more. So it's like, okay, now you go out and promote it, and you go out and do this, and you go out and do that. And they expect you to do that. And it's like, well, if you're doing all of that anyway, why not just do it for yourself?
Can I pause you 1 second? I'm going to
Dog
pause it. I'll be right.
very, very easy. It makes it very easy for you to do it yourself. The downside of that, of course, is just anybody can do it, even if they haven't taken the time to format or do all the things correctly. And so then you're kind of in a pool with a lot more people. But, you know, I mean, I'm grateful because so there's so many great programs out there now, so people can do their writing, they can edit themselves, they can format themselves. You know what? I don't want to be a jack of all trades when it comes to my books. I hire someone to do my covers. I tell them what I want. I hire them to do my covers. I hire someone to format. I hire an editor. I don't have lots of money, so I piecemeal as I go. I do it, you know, but at the same time, I'm happy to do that. The people I hire aren't giant companies. They're individual people making a living at it. And as an artist, an actor, and all of the things, I appreciate that. So, you know, I'm happy to do that for them. And it helps me, I think. So,
Yeah, I like that Amazon, with that, you can do both of those ways. You can get other people to help you with it. You could do it all yourself if you wanted to. And then the control you have over it, if you want to correct a spelling of a word or change a word error or whatever, you can go in there and change it. You don't have to go through some other company.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, good. I don't have to walk around knowing that I didn't close a parentheses in this chapter.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. I mean, if you want to change your paperback, you have to do that differently, but ebooks, it's easy. Do you find that you sell more ebooks or more paperback?
I've probably sold more paperbacks than ebooks.
With poetry, I would personally rather have a paperback.
Yeah.
I like a paperback of anything I read, but I read so much that, you know, I don't purchase paperbacks of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, reading a big book on a Kindle or an e-reader is tough because you just don't feel that like progression through it.
Yeah.
You can't look at it and go, this is what I've got. So reading like a big science fiction book or something like 800 pages, that's normally 800 pages on an e-reader is just going to be thousands. So that makes it a little different for me. But if I'm traveling, the e-reader is great. Yeah. And if you're like, you can get so many of the classics on there for either free or for very little, then that's pretty great too, to be able to have those and read them at your leisure. But yeah, there is a lot more books out there than there is time to read.
Oh my gosh, yes. I have stacks everywhere of actual paperbacks as well as my library on my Kindle. So many books. Yeah, but you know, if we can encourage people to read, whatever way that is, whether that's on an ebook or in a paperback, I think that's great. One thing I love about paperbacks is because I love reading historical fiction, and I love books with maps, you know, and even in science fiction and even in fantasy, I love books with maps. But with a paperback, I can flip back to that map all the time and figure out exactly where their journey's taking them or where they are. It's much harder to do on the Kindle. I know you can bookmark pages, but it's just different.
Yeah. With the e-readers, I always thought it was better to have some sort of website that supported it. So you could have the maps on there, you could have pictures if you wanted to, and people could kind of interact with it that way if they chose to.
I like that. Yeah.
You did an audiobook for one of yours, right?
I did the audiobook for book 1, and I must do book 2, 3, and 4. I just haven't done it yet. Life. I mentioned my mother, and I'm caregiver for her now, so that keeps me very busy. She lives in a cottage just in our backyard, so we can keep track of her and help her out with all of her needs. So I did the audiobook before she moved into that cottage 18 months ago. So I will do the others because people have really enjoyed the audiobooks, and coming from a background of acting, I could do different accents
Hmm.
and different things. And I really enjoyed it. I'll tell you what's really funny when you do your own audiobook, if you write some dark scenes like I've written, writing them is one thing, and then reading them out loud is a whole nother thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I've listened to some of your. You had another podcast that you did that's on Spotify that you
Oh
read
yeah.
some of it,
Yeah.
and I like that you do the different voices for it. And that be the question I always had for the audiobooks is, if you're reading it yourself, do you do different voices? If you're having somebody else do it, do you want them to do different voices? Or do you make it like like a radio show where you just have different people reading the different parts? And it, I haven't done any audiobooks yet, so I don't know. But like how much goes into it? How long did it take you to do it just you're reading it yourself?
Well, because I do a lot of voiceover work, and I will read, that can be as short as an ad, or it can be as long as an hour instructional thing for a business. I'm I'm pretty good at sight reading. So
Okay.
I was in the studio for 2 days for book one. Um,
Wow.
and it's only 53,000 words. Book one's my shortest. The editing my husband did, and that takes a lot longer. And then what we learned as we went, which so often with self-publishing you do, I didn't realize, we thought we were doing it all right. When we went to send it in, we had to have each chapter completely broken with so many seconds either side. So we had to go back in and fix and fix and fix. And then, of course, when we re-listened to it, we found, and he was following along with the book as I was reading to make sure I wasn't messing up, because sometimes with voiceover or with anything, you think you've done it right and you haven't, right?
Mm.
But we still missed a couple. So he's amazing. He said, okay, you said this word instead of this word. And I'm like, fine. So I'd go through the whole book and I'd find that word elsewhere and go back and tell him where it was. And he'd find it and he'd cut it out and put it in that spot.
Wow.
And he did that. And we were able to do it with the mistakes. And there was a handful, but except for one. There was only one word that I never said but one time in the book. And I can't tell you what it is. I'll have to try to figure out what it is because it was crazy. I didn't have it anywhere else in the book. Or it might be a word that I'd said multiple times, but the inflection was wrong to fit in that spot, right? But I wanted whisper sync as well, because everyone said, oh, you have to get whisper sync if you're going to be on Amazon, you're going to be on ACX Audible. You have to have whisper sync. That way people can be reading and then they can listen, and then they can read and then they can listen and go back and forth. But they determine whether you qualify for whisper sync, and I did, yay. So, but it can take a long time, and it's going to take longer with the next 3 books because they're longer books as well.
Mm.
I think it would be awesome, especially as an actor. I would love to have, I can think of a handful of actors I know local. I would love to say, you read these parts, you read these parts, you read these parts, and let's throw it together. And I am seeing more Audible books that have more than one reader, but usually not too many,
Mm.
and I'm glad that you like the different voices. I do have some people say to me, I don't like that. I just like, not about mine necessarily, but they're just like, I like it when just the person narrates the book. And I'm like, well, yeah, but are you talking about a book that's in first person? And of course, if it's in first person the whole way, it's going to be like that. But I don't know. I like some variety because, when you and I are reading and we can see it, whether it's on our Kindle or paperback, we don't have to know who's speaking each time because we can just follow the dialogue, right? But if you're doing it audio book and you don't have a change, then how are you going to know?
Yeah. I think it sounds like it would be as much work or probably more as formatting your manuscript, especially the first time for Amazon. And it's easy to get frustrated with it and then just say, all right, this is good enough. And then you end up with page breaks in the wrong place, or it just doesn't look like you wanted it to look.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I'm just going to go ahead and publish it because I'm sick of working on it. I think that's the one downfall of self-publishing is you got to fight that urge and just say, okay, look, I'm going to work on it. I'm excited about getting it done. I'm just going to do this section. and then I'll come back and do the next section, or I'll do these edits and then I'm not going to send it off right then. I'm going to come back and check it again, because you end up reading the book, however many times, and you're just sick of it by the end. And that's how you're ready to publish it, as
Yeah.
far as my experience goes. But
do you read everything out loud that you write when you think you're done?
probably not everything, but it's if you're writing a story like a novel or whatever, then I think I'd probably have read it 4 or 5 times at least before going to the second draft of it. Just because when you're writing it, you write it and then you're like, well, let me see what does that make sense? You read it again, and maybe one of those times is out loud and maybe not. But it's not something I consciously try to do. Poetry, I'll read out loud just to hear what it sounds like. But I don't remember doing it for any of the books specifically, like reading the whole book. I do get the sample from Amazon and then read that again. So like, I'm not done. I got to read it one more time. And then you find however many mistakes, because I think you're always going to find mistakes. And then you correct those, order another sample because you're not sure how it's going to if it's going to mess it up or not. You go through it as much as you can online, order the other sample, get it, read it again, and you're like, oh, how did I miss this?
Yeah.
Like, so you have 2 or 3 things that you have to fix. And then you have to determine, am I going to just fix it and then read it again, or what? But
yeah,
do you read it all out loud?
I do. I think I find a lot of things that I'd like to change when I do that. I might realize that I said that word 3 sentences ago. Do you know what I mean? I can pick a different word for that, whereas I didn't notice it in print. So, yeah, I do. I read everything out loud, but that could be just because I'm an actor. When I learn script for a play or whatever as well, I constantly at home rehearsing out loud or in my car. My kids were so funny when they were little. We'd be driving along, taking them from school or whatever, and they'd say, Mom, are you talking to us or are you doing a monologue? Because I would just start talking all the time. And if I carried on without answering them, they knew it was just something I was working on with my acting. So,
do you think that script reading and writing positively affected your novel writing?
I think it could only have helped with character development, because as an actor, whenever I've done either a film or a play, I create incredible backstories for every character. You comb through the script and you take all the clues that are given to you. You like to look at it all from the writer's perspective. You look at all the clues given to you, and then you look at all the things other characters say about your character, what they see, all the things you say about yourself, and then you have to create a whole bunch more on top of that. So, you said if someone asked you about your characters, you'd have all this backstory. And yeah, there's so much backstory. And I think that can only help with the characters, because, when we sit down to write, we know, but if it's something we want our readers to know, we have to make sure we give it to them.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, for that reason, I'm very vague on physical descriptions. I give little snippets here and there, like someone might have blue eyes or someone might have brown or green or whatever. They might be tall and thin, but I give very little physical descriptions other than that, because I want the readers to see what they see. I want them to imagine what that character looks like.
I like that. I think that is probably, I like minimal description as well, enough to be able to, advance the story how you need to. But I also go with the idea that if this were ever a movie, anybody could play it. Like, it might have something that says they were tall or they were taller than this other character. It's not going to say how tall,
right?
But I like that idea where if you're reading it, this person could be white, they could be black, they could be Indian, they could be all these different things they could be. You don't know.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
I wonder if that for you is from the view of scripts where you're like, I want to be able to cast anyone in this. So I want to have it as open as possible. It's like you're not going to describe Brad Pitt if you don't think you can get Brad Pitt for your movie. So
Did you, I know you mentioned being in Oregon. Did you ever go to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in Ashland?
I don't have a direct memory of it, but we went to a bunch of different art shows and things around there. So it might have been in there. Is that kind of Renaissance fairy or?
Well, they do a lot of Shakespeare, obviously, but they do contemporary plays as well and musicals. But one thing I've always loved about their casting is they just cast, the colorblind, as it were, for lack of a better word. So, if when I used to do film work, for instance, and my hair was red for a while, it'd be like, oh, well, we have to give her a red-haired daughter, or we have, you know what I mean? It's like the Shakespeare Festival didn't worry about that, and it's like you can have a person of color as the mom, and then a white kid. It doesn't matter, and so I love that about them, and that's one of the things that I like. And I keep toying with this idea of getting my readers to cast. I've cast so many characters with multiple people, and I've put their imagery, and I'm like, this is a family here, and this is a family here. Let's say this is the king and the queen and their princesses' daughters, and I've mixed it all up. And I'm just curious as to what the readers would think. But I just, yeah, maybe because I like the idea of just not. I like non-traditionally casted plays where a woman might be playing the role that was traditionally played by a man, or a man might be playing a role that was traditionally played by a woman, or a person who doesn't, present as either, or presents as whatever. So I think that's important. And I've actually written a character into my book as well, who was born one way and presents differently now. Because I know, it happened in the 14th century. We just talk about it all the time now. And I allow them the ability, even though it's 14th century, to be accepted in society and to call themselves the pronoun that they choose, which is they, so yeah.
I feel like in the Shakespeare Festival, you might run into problems with Othello, but besides that, you could do any. And then, like, I remember watching Peter Pan as a kid, maybe even on the Disney Sunday movie Peter Pan. And I think that was a girl that played Peter Pan.
Yeah, it always was. And
that made more sense.
Yeah. And they still, when they do Peter Pan in the shows, because I lived in England for a while, when they do the shows there, the pantomime and stuff like that. I mean, Peter Pan was always a girl, but pantomime was always played by men. Shakespeare always cast men, right? That was to play women, just because women weren't allowed on the stage.
Well, Peter Pan, the classic vampire story that it is. That's a good one.
Well, we've set the world to rights. We've discussed the parallel universes.
Uh-oh, somebody's done. Okay, so what's the best way for people to follow what you're doing and get a copy of your book?
Find me on Amazon. I can give you the link, Rhys Shaw, and you can see the writing right there, the spelling, RHYSSHAW. If people want to sign up for my newsletter, I can give you that link too. They will get a free novella, which is a prequel to all of the 4 books. And I wrote that after I wrote all the other 4 books. And so I think it's fun for people that have read all the books anyway, because I leave the identity of the characters in the novella secret till the very last paragraph. So they can be guessing if they've already read it, or they'll learn more about people that they're going to meet when they read the book. And yeah, I mean, Wellexia.com is another way to get to my website, my newsletter. So, because that's the name of my kingdom, Wellexia. It's the Wellexia series, which is just a word I made up. It just came to me. What am I going to call this kingdom? It's just like the names. I mean, I don't know how you choose your names for your characters, but it's fun to choose the names, make them up.
Names matter. Yeah,
names matter.
Sure,
they do.
It makes me look at other writers' choice of names and in TV shows and movies differently after writing, because you're like, it's a big deal to pick a name.
It is. I mean, as a parent, it's a big deal to pick a name for your child. You want it to be right. You know what's so awesome? My first was born in England. You have 5 weeks to name your baby there. And we took it. We took those 5 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we went down to the civil office like the last day, I think, and we did her birth certificate with her name on it then. Prior to that, she was just baby with our last name. But here, you know, my son was born here and they were like in the hospital a few hours later in my room getting his name out. So it's kind of nice. We tried out different names on our daughter. We were like, we had some names in mind because we didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl. We tried names and she'd go, wah, she didn't like it. So we're like, okay, we like this one. Well, that one worked. Yeah, that's you. And you get to know their personality. 5 weeks, you know, you get to know.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, the links you talked about, like your website, Instagram, Facebook, your author's page, and a Goodreads one, I think I also have
Thank
the
you.
links for them that will be in the show notes so people can check those out.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for your time. Do you have any thoughts in closing or things
Oh,
you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
I mean, I think we talked about a lot of stuff, and I'm really glad that we did. I think we talked about how writing can be cathartic and help you overcome trauma. Art is important. Just having conversations with people is important. You know, where would you and I have met? Probably not. We're in different parts of the country, but here we've had a lovely hour and a bit talking, and I think that's 2 hours. I think that's awesome. You know, it didn't feel like it. It was just really nice. How often do we in life anymore sit down and have a long conversation with someone? We're always in such a hurry to go somewhere. So for that, I'm grateful. And be kind. I just want people to be kind. What was the Dalai Lama? They asked him what his religion was. And he said, my religion is simple. My religion is kindness. And I love that.
The old Dolly.
Dolly.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Thank you.